they abandoned their belief in the supernatural. Now, you are asking me to sabotage that achievement, to send them back into the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear? No!
Welcome everyone to another thrill-packed episode of Trolling with Logic. It's the 18th of October as we record this, and joining me, I think it's Lundi's first appearance on the new segment. Welcome in, of course, Big Lundi.
Hey everybody, glad to be here.
And welcome in a brand new face all round. Welcome in our newest member, Ziller. How are you doing, mate?
All good, man. How's it going?
Oh, it's going fantastic. And welcome to the show. You're a Tool virgin, so we're popping your cherry right now.
Yeah, I feel violated already.
It's only going to get worse. So I don't know which story shall we go to first. I think as we spoke about this just before we went on air, Lundy, we'll go to this one. And the headline is Kenwick man accused of assaulting hypnotized woman. And just to give you, an amateur hypnotist is accused of having sex with a young woman while she was hypnotized. Kevin Christian Geyer allegedly dressed the woman in an attempt to cover up the assault before waking her, said the court documents. So I'll quickly, Lundy, I know you've got quite a bit to say on this because this is kind of a hot button issue for you.
A little bit, and for a couple of reasons. The first thing is that, when you think of hypnotism, you're thinking mainly of the guys who go on stages and have people come up and then go, okay, everybody, I'm going to have these people act like they're in a rock show and they're not even going to know it. It's going to be great. But that's of course all nonsense. In fact, it's the exact opposite as to how hypnotism works. Hypnotism is kind of like hyper attention. There's plenty of ways that you can hypnotize yourself. In fact, we do it every day. If you focus yourself on reading a book or watching a movie, or when you're focused while driving, these are all forms of self-hypnotism to perform a task in the broad sense of what hypnotism actually means. But the other thing about hypnotism is that it renders you suggestible. That much is true because you're hyper attentive to the person who's hypnotizing you. And as far as these psychological sessions go, so they're able to get you to gradually relax. They're able to get you to become uninhibited and become more imaginative. A lot of the ways in which one is described when being in a state of hypnosis during a psychological evaluation or anything like that is that you're more like a child as far as how your mind works. And the main thing is that when you address hypnotism as a skeptic, what's happening basically is a placebo effect. Believing that the hypnotism works is what makes it work. And not in the sense of like the power of the mind, but in the sense of you being able to put the suggestions in your own mind and force yourself to believe these suggestions. So that's kind of just the basics as to how hypnotism works, without getting into the deeper psychology of it. So that's hypnotism in general, which because of that description, it allows me to believe that something like this could happen to perhaps somebody who's rather gullible as to how this is supposed to work. And the other thing that really makes me angry, aside from the fact that a guy clearly sexually assaulted her, then apologized on the phone through a text message. And I guess the maximum thing that's happened to him thus far is he's not allowed to see the woman for a year. Like, that's it. No. He's not allowed to see her for a year that after sexually assaulting her. That's kind of ridiculous to me. Meanwhile, when you read the comments on this story, they're really horrible. So one of the top comments, I must say he is not that old, and more than likely so is she. I think it is a no crime, whatever that means, as the girl was a simple idiot to have a flake use hocus pocus on her. She went there fully knowing she was going to have sex. Did she? Because that wasn't indicated anywhere in the article.
Yeah.
But what's this person's reasoning? Well, why else would a woman go to a man's house? To play cards? To have a beer? Have sex? Face it. I've even used glib to take the honeypot from the girls. Even used booze. Nothing to see here. Oh, really?
Oh, Craig, there's so much wrong with that. The main thing is, why else would a woman go to a man's house? And I said, well, there's an infinite number of reasons why women come into your house.
The first part is kind of weird because basically what he's saying is that she's an idiot in the first place for going and having him use, like, quote unquote magic on her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, let's see, if you really believe that, then clearly this is a person not in a very decent state of mind. And as such, regardless, it would be taking advantage of her to do some sort of sexual practice on her. So that's that. And then he goes on to say, I've used beer to fuck women in my house before, which is not a very good way to have intercourse. Use beer. Oh, God.
So, Ziller, what's your views on this?
This story is just full of wrong on every level, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm kind of scanning through it.
My uncle used to do hypnotherapy.
Yeah. Is there not also, I don't know if it's true or not, that you can't do anything against your will when you're hypnotized as well?
Yeah, you have free will when you're hypnotized. The problem is that your free will is essentially to do what you believe you're supposed to do.
Okay.
There's no way that you can make somebody do something they don't want to do.
The thing is that you can kind of circumvent that in a way by having them ultra relaxed, perhaps asleep, things like that. Things that on the surface they would want to do, or at least have been convinced that they want to do, which would allow you to do other things that they might not want you to do.
All right. So but you can't, like, say, hypnotize someone to walk out into the middle of the traffic.
No.
You
can't hypnotize somebody to go and kill the president.
All right. I think, shall we go? Lundi, you had a story, I think, didn't you?
Yes. So an atheist family was recently received some terrorist threats in Louisiana. So these terrorist threats are typed on pieces of paper that have clearly been cut.
Yeah.
And they're being left in their mailbox. And the first letter reads like this. We know who you are, and we know where you live. We know where you work. You're a little group of devil worshippers that isn't welcome here. Let the love and message of the Lord filter through you, and may you escape from the eternal damnation that you have condemned you and your innocent children to. Repent your satanic ways, or you will find that the Lord works in very mysterious ways. You are against God, and you are not welcome in this area, and we will spread his message to the hearts and minds of your innocent children. To deny his word to your children is abuse, and if you do not learn to love him and his word, then we will have no choice but to take action to protect your children from your devil-enabling ways. Do not even try to report us to the police. We are everywhere, and his work will be done in his name through us, the true believers.
Oh, my God.
Wow, that's nice and neighborly.
That would kind of mess with me if I received a message like that in my mailbox.
I know there's no way you can justify this, but was there something that this family, have they spoken out or something that has caused kind of this mail to appear?
So the family is actually members of the secular gathering in the area with the Community Mission Chapel, which is led by the ex-pastor Jerry DeWitt.
Yeah.
So being a member of that is basically an admittance to not being a member of a church, but being more interested in secular ways of getting together and as a community. So in that sense, they could be found out as being atheistic in the area just by being members of the Community Mission Chapel. But regardless, what I just read was the first letter. And then the second letter essentially came afterwards, which was, it's a lot shorter. You could not keep away from it, could you? You and your group are infecting this area and driving the one true God out. We have warned you before. We are warning you again. We will stop you in any way we have to. He has mysterious ways. Keep your family close.
Wow. And is the police picking up on this? Are they taking action on it?
Thus far, I haven't seen any police action on this. Jerry DeWitt did make a post on his Facebook to let everyone in the area know as to what's going on with these people and that they need to work together to find out who's doing this and to stop it.
And obviously myself and Mary were outside the US, but is that quite common in that kind of area to get that kind of reaction?
In Louisiana, I'm not entirely surprised that something like this is happening because it's part of the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up getting that. This is obviously one of the more extreme versions of what's going on. The more common thing that'll happen to a known atheist family in the Bible Belt is something more along the lines of just ostracization, just avoiding them and shunning them in general. Not usually the out and out veiled death threats.
I'm just still kind of stunned that can go on. I mean, I know I talk about where I grew up, it was quite fundamentalist, but them at their very worst, all they would do was shun you a little bit, but it's never been heard of like death threats or anything like that sent to kind of out atheists or people who criticise the kind of established church back home.
This is crazy. I'm just looking at the letters now and I can't believe this is going on. It looks like something that you'd expect to see in a hardline fundamentalist Islamic country or something.
Yeah. And because the other thing, when I hear of these stories, a lot of the atheists and that are getting all the hate, they say sometimes the police aren't that cooperative with them. I know in some stories it's been said the police just turned around and said, well, you brought this on, being like that.
Yeah, there's definitely victim blaming that goes on when it comes to atheists in particular areas being harassed in one way or another. Whereas it's like, well, why don't you just stop being an atheist? I mean, that'll stop it. Yeah. It's like that's not a solution.
Yeah, or shut up or move to another state or something like that.
Yeah, it's why don't you move to a state that's a little more liberal and actually embraces your kind of devil worshipping ways?
There seems to be something weird going on as well. Atheists are being branded devil worshippers. Is that something that even the media kind of plays up on or in some way exacerbates in the US? The idea of atheists as devil worship?
Even Fox News doesn't go that far. Your most conservative media generally won't go that terribly far. However, the problem is that the more fundamentalist you are as a Christian, the more likely you are to simply believe that somebody who is not pro your religion is working for the devil in one way or another. There was a bit of a meme a while back of a picture of a devil person hiding dinosaur bones in the ground. What that basically was, of course, was the devil invented evolution and invented the notion of dinosaurs to try and trick people. And that's kind of what you get when you get to the more crazy fundamentalists, where anything that runs counter to their religion is just the devil.
Yeah.
It's like that, is it Happy Gilmore or something? Oh no, the Waterboy with the devil.
Yeah, it was Waterboy, I believe. I believe it was his mother.
Yeah, football is the devil, women are the devil, everything was the devil.
I invented electricity, Maxwell was the devil. Right?
Okay, shall we go on to the next story?
Certainly.
This one is from that esteemed bastion of scientific journalism, the Daily Mail.
Oh, joy.
And it's entitled, What Heaven's Really Like, by leading brain surgeon who says he's been there. Read this testimony before you scoff. It might just shake your beliefs. It's quite a lengthy text, so I'll leave the description, in the recording of this. But essentially, he says he went on a very vivid journey while apparently he was in a coma. He contracted meningitis, was in a coma for 7 days. And he said that this very vivid hallucination of heaven. And he's basically said, well, this is one key quote I found in it. Plenty of scientists have a lot of difficulty with my statement. My experience undermines their whole belief system, but the one place I have found ready acceptance is in the church, where my story often tallies with people's expectations.
No, really?
Yeah, I know, that's totally unreal. Like I said, if I walked to the church next door and said, I met Jesus, and they said, oh, wow, we're all about that. Oh, well, stun the crows kind of thing.
This is hardly a damning indictment of the scientific community, really, is it?
But no, he goes on, he describes like there's a circular entity emitting a beautiful heavenly music that he calls the spinning melody. The light opened up like a rip in the fabric of a coarse realm, and I felt myself going through the rock up into a valley of lush and fertile greenery, and on it goes with all this.
Here's the fun thing about that. He had this religious experience, apparently, while he was in a coma. And beforehand, he says that he did not believe in these sorts of experiences, at the very least, that he was a skeptic.
Yeah.
So evidently he received a brief glimpse of heaven despite being a skeptic, which would lead me to be fairly skeptical if I was like a Christian and I believed that skeptics don't go to heaven. I don't know how you get from one place to the other on that. Plus, this isn't the first time this guy has said this. Dr. what's his name? Eben Alexander.
Yeah.
He's been doing this for years, talking about how he's been how he saw heaven when he was unconscious, and despite brain scans saying that his brain was not functioning at the time he had this experience. It's very weird because he's been doing this for years, and for many years he's basically been seen as somebody who's just trying to milk Christians of money because he writes books on this. He sponsors the writing of other books on this. He's kind of in the business of spreading these stories, despite the fact that it's been demonstrated that these sorts of experiences can be artificially induced into people.
Yeah. And also he keeps saying, there was no brain activity while I was in the coma. Well, I think a technical definition when you've got zero brain activity, is that not death?
That'd be brain death if absolutely nothing is going on in your brain.
Yeah. You don't come back from that, do you?
No. Well, it's very, very extremely rare, I would say. But the other thing is, he's saying, there's no brain activity, so what else could it have been? But they say, while you went into the coma and afterwards, there was brain activity because your brain was going into overload, and you could have been having the hallucinations at that time. Because, as we all know, when you sleep, people think their dreams last for hours, when it's been shown your dreams are only a few minutes of actual brain activity.
I should correct myself a little bit. Even though he says that he was a skeptic prior to this experience, he does say that he was nominally a Christian prior, which means that he wasn't really a regular worshiper or anything along those lines.
And then there's the usual thing that I always find with these stories. He talks about in his vision there was a butterfly, and on one of the wings of the butterfly there was the face of a woman. And then when he comes out, he contacts his family. They send him a picture, and he goes, "Oh my goodness, who's that in the picture? That was the woman in my vision." And it turned out to be a sister he never knew he had. Now,
of course,
the problem with that is that's kind of after the fact, and I'm pretty sure they could have sent him any old picture, and he would have said, "That's the person I saw." I mean, it's very, very...
Yeah, if you would have just, sent him a picture of a woman who had some sort of similar facial features, it would just need to be somewhat similar to work.
Our minds are good at recognizing faces, but they're not that amazing. If you just show somebody two faces that look vaguely similar, then...
Yeah.
We can see faces in mountains and shit that aren't there, so...
Because I've heard this, and I've heard this from actually quite a lot of people. They say they've had dreams or something. I know it's like their great-grandma, how, because they go and ask, and then they see a picture. Oh, look, that's definitely it. But all they probably saw was a face, and then their minds kind of filled in the gaps when they see the picture. Just as, it wants it to be that, because it's kind of comforting or something like that.
The entire story is written by Dr. Eben Alexander, and it's just his personal account. It's really nothing to take too terribly seriously, since he's been going on about this for years.
Okay. Mari, have you got anything else to add to that?
Just that anecdotes aren't evidence, and the plural of anecdotes is not data, Yeah.
And it's just Lundi, you seem to have heard of this guy. Has he done a few of these claims, or is it always the same one, just repackaged a bit?
It's always the same one, just repackaged a bit.
Yeah.
As basically, for him, he had his original experience, and then from there on, he's been into the propagation of other people's experiences as well.
Just one note, I just saw this, I've read one of the comments. He claims he slipped into the coma as a result of severe bacterial meningitis. Apparently, one of the doctors who treated him actually said that the coma was medically induced and he had brain activity all the time. So I don't know if that claim is true or not, but there was already doubt over the claim, but that throws some serious doubt onto it.
I do like this other comment down here. Oh, look, he's selling a book.
Okay, this is the last bit of the news we'll go. It's not really news as such. It's just a little bit of entertainment. Basically, there's a whole new genre of music out there, and it's 9/11 truther songs. And I so happen to have some of them queued up to listen, and we'll listen to a snippet of each one, and I'll get your feedback on each one. How about that?
It sounds like it's going to be magical.
Yep.
Lovely.
So this one, the first one is the Freebies with 9/11's a lie. So let's hear this.
This is from the old school, new school.
Something wrong, there was time to tell. Spread the word, it's nothing new. You gotta educate yourself in truth. It's not alright, it's not okay. You should look the other way. We can help you understand. New York Times, the effect on man. When we are another away, they are a mother. 9/11's a lie, 9/11's a lie. Miracles are shaking the world, we started waking. 9/11's a lie, 9/11's a lie. 9/11's a lie, 9/11's a lie.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
That one, I've got to give, they could, if the truther thing ever runs dry, I think they could make a good living as being a Bee Gees tribute act at the very least.
Are all these basically just rip-offs of well-known songs?
No, some of them do make their own kind of original works, but yeah, it's quite, I would never have...
Are you saying there's 9/11 truthers out there that actually have original thoughts?
At least concerning things that aren't 9/11, more something along the lines of music.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, that song that we just listened to, is that real or is that a parody?
I advise everyone, I'll put the link, go and watch the video, because they've got clips of the Bee Gees videos, and they've kind of got things like planes with chemtrails green screened into the background and all that kind of stuff. So judge for yourself.
Just listening to that sounded like parody to me.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a person that believes that the government has the ability to fake 9/11, and that they did, and that there's this, like, some sort of conspiracy, like, I wouldn't think that you would reduce it to something that comical.
Yeah. It's
So true. You definitely wouldn't put it in a song as camp as Staying Alive by the Bee Gees.
well, mind you, we do have Mike Adams and his alt-med raps, they're another piece of just absolute, they're just something to behold altogether.
And then, of course, you have the Expelled rap, which was an interesting foray into anti-evolution rap.
Yeah. Okay, shall we go on to the next song? We got you in the mood.
Sure.
This one is from Thomas Hansen, PhD, and it is called Nanothermite in the Dust.
Nanothermites, it showed up in the dust from the towers. What was it doing there? Where did it come from? And who put it in? spray it on, light it up, remote control, perfect for demolition. Blow it up, blast right through, so versatile and safe to use.
Okay.
That's catchy.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's the actual standard I expected from 9/11 through their songs, to be honest. Like, the first one is actually, you've got to admit that they did put a good bit of effort, and it does sound quite professional, but that is more what I was expecting.
Listening to that was very interesting to me because it was sort of an insight into the mind of a 9/11 truther, where there's nanothermite in the fucking dust, which, that alone, we're just going to assume that that's true for the purposes of this song and discussion. And then, why is it there? And then, I know why it's there, for demolition purposes.
Ziller, what's your opinion on that song?
Can you actually paint thermite onto things? This is something that's new to me.
I have no idea.
You kind of can. It's kind of a substance that you can make sticky enough to put onto things, but you can't do it in the volumes that would be required to melt steel.
And also to bring down two of the biggest buildings in the world at the time.
I saw an example of how well thermite does in burning through things, and it doesn't even do all that great at burning through an Xbox 360.
Yeah. Okay, shall we go on to the next one? Oh, well, this is going to be interesting. It's called 10-Second Free Fall, and it's a 9/11 reggae song.
Ooh, that sounds nice and pleasant.
We know the official story is impossible, so we set about scientifically to come up with a hypothesis and then to test that.
All right, we're just searching for the truth, because so far we've been truthless. I mean to be ruthless. I did. It wasn't 10-second free fall. That's what I saw. That's what you saw. That's what everybody saw. 10-second free fall. Official story don't make a lick of sense at all. It was a 10-second free fall.
Clearly the buildings are brought down by controlled demolition.
It was controlled demolition. Concrete into fine dust. That's a hell of a transition from controlled demolition.
Okay, I think we get the point of what they're trying to put across there.
Production scores, I'll give it.
I wouldn't really call that reggae. I would say that's more along the lines of like bluegrass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was in the description, and they had to have Alec Jones in there. So far, I would rank that second compared to the Bee Gees, the first, that one second, and I can't remember the other guy because it was pretty bad, but that's the kind of running order for me right now. I don't know if you guys agree with that assessment.
No, I don't know, because that sounded a lot more original, so I'm going to go ahead and place that above the BG ripoff.
Yeah, I'm with Lundi on that one. Yeah.
Okay, and the next one, well, this is the final one. It's by a guy called Martin Noakes, and it's just called Building 7. So here we go.
There's a million reasons why I don't believe it. There's a million reasons why it can't be true. Open fire, can't melt steel. It's not hot enough. It's nothing new, it's not a mystery. Check out the Reichstag, Germany. There's a million questions still remain unanswered. There's a million questions still to be resolved.
Okay, and there you go.
That sounds like something that you would put in the background of someone like walking through a park, just like staring at the sky.
That actually sounds to me like an X Factor kind of audition.
A little bit, yeah.
And when the video is a work to behold as well. He's actually put a lot.
There's a video with it.
Yeah, there's videos with all of these, but this one's got the best video. He's actually done little animations of Building 7 collapsing and all this kind of stuff to go with it. Like kind of little, in sepia tone animations in the background.
Oh my.
He's got all the fade-ins of him singing in different places on the screen and all the titles and all that. I'll give him that credit. He does seem to have put a lot of proper effort. I'll probably say he's the best one of the lot so far.
I do love this notion that, like, fires can't cause buildings to collapse. Like, that's never happened before.
Yeah, I mean, we should all go out and try to just set fire to buildings and watch them not collapse and just stay completely intact. There you go. That's a kind of a descent into the world of 9/11 truthers there. I think we've all been there. It's a place I like to just dip my toes into now and again.
Are they still going on with this idea of, you know, the time that it took for the buildings to collapse being free fall speed, even though you actually watch the videos and watch them not collapse at free fall speed?
Yes. And it's the same. And also Building 7 has no damage. And then you show them the picture of the other side where Building 7 was basically gutted. But no, they stick to the same claims and you can't debate them. It's just...
Well, no. I mean, if anybody's seen the Miles Power videos on all the 9/11 truther stuff, when you discuss these things with them, if you do come up with a complete and total rational, reasonable explanations for what they think is, like, damning evidence, they'll just move on to the next thing. Like, they don't really listen. They don't care.
Well, and I'll give Miles one thing. He did actually find some actually quite nice people to speak to, because that's not my experience with truthers at all.
Yeah. Well, probably because he was there live.
Yeah.
If you're talking to a truther, like, online, they're a lot more ballsy when they're talking to you.
Well, yeah, ballsy and a lot more illiterate as well, I find. It's like the old saying, you can hate, you can spell, but for some reason you can't do two at the same time.
I remember having an argument with a truther where he asked me if I ever even read the official report. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, you're a liar. I'm like, okay. He's like, if you read the official report, you can go through every single line and figure out what is wrong with that, what is wrong with it. Okay. And I'm like, all right. And so I brought up the official report. I'm like, let's read through it together. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that with you.
Who was the guy who did the animation of Building 7? He actually put in explosions. He animated them into the building.
Was,
and then everyone jumped on it, thinking, oh yeah, it went viral. This is proof.
Edward.
And then he came out saying, no, I made it up. And they still hold it up as if it's proof.
That was Edward Current. He even put a UFO in the background just to, like, point out this is not real.
And he also, for one frame, I think in the smoke, had it saying, this is a hoax. He did everything he could to subtly make it as obvious. But like I said, it spread straight away when he did it.
People who were mirroring the video actually edited out the part of the frame that said this is a hoax.
All right.
So it could say that, and they'll just edit that out, because they don't care. They just want to spread their bullshit.
All right, and I think we can wrap up the news there. That's been a fun one. So, how have you enjoyed you two are kind of brand new to doing the news. So, how did you enjoy it, guys?
Yeah, personally, I thought it was great.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, all right. And so what do we have coming up? I think, Mr. Ziller, you're going to be doing your first segment for us later.
Yeah. Well, as soon as that's finished.
I know, it's like I say, it's a bit straight. We're still kind of getting used to doing all this in chunks and then it getting pasted together. And I think Mortimer is going to have another one of his guides to skepticism. And we do have an interview planned. We don't know who it is yet, but whoever it is, I'm sure they're going to be wonderful. Because before this, we did an interview schedule, but they didn't manage to make it. But hopefully we'll get that rescheduled. There'll be an interview of some description, please. So hope you enjoy the rest of the show, and we'll see you all very soon.
Geometry. You may remember it as the intensely boring subject you had to study in maths class. But why is it so important? Well, geometry infiltrates pretty much every field of science, from physics to biology to chemistry, and has many applications in our everyday lives, from navigation to figuring out the orbits of planets and the motions of stars, agriculture and engineering to video games, geography and land surveying to even interior design, town planning to telecommunications, general relativity to string theory, and much more besides. Every aspect of our lives is touched by geometry. In fact, Of all the mathematical subjects, perhaps none of them has such a profound impact on our lives as geometry. So how can such a boring and often even mind-numbingly difficult subject as geometry play such an important role? Well, geometry is the branch of mathematics that looks at shape, size, the relative position of figures, and the properties of space. And since the universe we live in is largely defined by spatial dimensions, as well as a temporal dimension, it's no surprise that a branch of mathematics that investigates these properties should play such an important role. Geometry itself has different branches of study: Euclidean geometry, differential geometry, topology and projective geometry, and algebraic geometry, each with its own applications and subdivisions of study as well. The history of geometry as an area of study can be traced back to at least 5,000 years ago, from the earliest records of ancient Babylon and the Indus Valley civilization, where it was developed to satisfy the practical concerns of surveying, astronomy, and construction. There's even evidence that both the Egyptians and Babylonians had versions of the Pythagorean theorem a millennia and a half before Pythagoras was even born. Even the concept of the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, which we now know of as pi, was understood by these early geometers long before Archimedes came onto the scene. The ancient Babylonians approximated the value of pi to be 3, which is 100% accurate to astrophysicists today. We may go more into why this is the case later on. Though this approximation seems to have been used more for practical purposes. They appear to have more accurately defined the ratio as 25/8 or 3.125. Not bad for an ancient civilization, and way too accurate for today's astrophysicists. The ancient Egyptians approximated the ratio to be 4 times the square of 8/9, or around 3.16. Slightly less accurate than the Babylonians, but still pretty good for people that walked the earth around 4,000 years ago. Now, of course, when you think of geometry, you most likely think of Greece and the age of antiquity, and certainly this is a time when geometry really exploded, when Thales and his student Pythagoras arrived, along with other household names such as Plato, Archimedes, Aristotle, and Euclid. Geometry became so important to these early mathematicians that it even took on a religious significance and imbued into many of their works are esoteric beliefs surrounding the importance and even spirituality, divinity, and sacredness behind this field of mathematics. However, as is so often the case, we are so closely bonded through our cultural identity in the Western world to the world of antiquity that we can be blinded to the works of other civilizations, whose development we fail to recognize as having influenced our own. Yes, even the supposedly pure fields of mathematical study are not untainted by historical and socio-political bias. The Sulba Sutras, literally aphorisms of the chords in Vedic Sanskrit, from around the 7th century BC in India, contains the earliest known verbal expression of Pythagoras' theorem. Written in the 4th century BCE by the Chinese mathematician Mozi, the Mo Jing gave an atomic definition of the geometric point, and arguably some of the most important early work in geometry was conducted in the early Islamic world, which expanded further on and even helped preserve the works of much of the antiquarian mathematicians, whose works would be lost to history if it wasn't for the ancient Islamic scholars. Indeed, it seems impossible to even have a civilization without some understanding and development of geometry. This field of mathematics is intrinsically etched into our history, its application helping to define and form it, and helping to determine the course of civilizations themselves. Perhaps the best anecdote to exemplify the importance of this branch of mathematics in our socio-political history, and the import it was given at the time by the leaders of those civilizations, is the story of Archimedes and the Romans. When Rome successfully captured Syracuse in Sicily during the Second Punic War, General Marcellus ordered that the great mathematician be brought to him unharmed, and described him as a geometric Priarius, or giant. Unfortunately, so the story goes, the mathematician was murdered by his intended captors, as he requested that they don't disturb his work, extinguishing the light of one of the greatest mathematical and scientific thinkers of the day. It's even arguable that geometry helped the Romans defeat the army of Boudicca in a battle where they were outnumbered around 10-1. Forming as men into teeth, Linus was able to funnel the enemy into a tightly packed mass, using their overwhelming numbers against them. This event had a massive impact on the Roman occupation of Britain, and subsequently the history of Britain and beyond. The Prussian leader, Frederick the Great, produced a geometric strategy to battle, emphasizing lines of maneuver, awareness of terrain, and possession of critical strongpoints, ultimately leading to the strategy of exhaustion and attrition warfare that would become the hallmark of the strategy of the First World War. Napoleon's rise and fall is a prime example of the role that geometry plays in the life of empires. Beginning his military career as an artillery captain, Napoleon was fascinated by this subject, which is behind everything from the production of accurate maps used by the artillery for targeting and ranging, to ballistics and the flight of cannonballs. His effective use of geometry propelled him up the ranks and singled him out as a great military strategist. As he later progressed through the ranks, geometry played a key role in the formulation of his tactics on the battlefield, from the applications for artillery, to the formation of regiments, to the development of defences and more. Arguably, one of the greatest and most profound impacts geometry has had on humanity has been its application in discovering our place in the cosmos. This should come as no surprise to the etymologists out there, since the word geometry comes from the Greek geo meaning earth and metron meaning measurement. It literally translates as earth measurement. Now, many of you will be familiar with the story of Eratosthenes, although I'm willing to bet you've heard the popular myth, one that was even propagated by Carl Sagan in his renowned TV series Cosmos, that Eratosthenes proved the Earth was round. In fact, Eratosthenes never intended to prove this, nor did he really achieve it. The actual shape of the Earth had long since been accepted as spheroidal, thanks to the observations of the motions of the stars by merchants who travelled to the very limits of the known world, and by observations of ships moving away over the horizon. The idea of a spherical Earth can be dated as far back as the 6th century BCE, and was firmly established in the 3rd century BCE thanks to the works of Greek astronomers. Eratosthenes, as the chief librarian of the Library of Alexandria, was fully aware of the fact that the Earth was spheroidal, and he produced his experiment to discover the circumference of the Earth, not its shape. Certainly, though, you can use Eratosthenes' experiment with a bit more trigonometry to prove that the Earth is spherical, but his experiment alone and his calculations were not designed to do this. Geometry's impact on our perceived place in the cosmos didn't end with proving the world isn't flat, though. Copernicus applied geometry to postulate that the Earth doesn't inhabit a special place at the centre of the universe. Kepler applied it to map out the orbits of the planets around the Sun and to produce his laws of motion, which were later modified by Newton. Newton went on to invent calculus, arguably one of the most important developments in mathematics, and applied geometry to produce his theory of gravity, and his laws of motion are so accurate that we still use them today in space flight. Einstein progressed further on this by practically defining gravity as a property of the geometry of space-time itself. In fact, you can't get close to understanding general and special relativity without a firm knowledge of geometry. Geometry has been used not only to plot our position among the stars and the motions of those stars and the Earth, it is even carved into our description of the very force that makes the entire universe move. But geometry is more than just something that has been developed by and led the development of civilization and the sciences, though. It seems that geometry is hardwired into our personal development. From the moment you are born, you spend your time seeking out and recognizing geometric patterns. Babies respond not only to faces, but even to images that are made to look like faces. Show a newborn child a series of dots in a line on a piece of paper and move it around, and you'll probably get a blank stare in return. Arrange those dots into two eyes and a curve representing a smile and move that image around in front of the baby, and it will remain transfixed on the image. This phenomenon doesn't stop as we grow up either. For example, have you ever looked at the front of a car and imagined how it looks like a face, with its headlights representing eyes, the number plate or radiator grille representing the mouth, and even the manufacturer's logo representing the nose? This phenomenon is behind the anthropomorphizing of inanimate objects, which even lies at the heart of the animation industry. Even our entertainment industries are heavily influenced by geometry. Now, this phenomenon demonstrates the fact that geometry is so hardwired into our personal development that it can often lead us to finding patterns that don't exist, or assigning fallacious meanings to patterns. This is known as pareidolia, our propensity to seek out patterns gone haywire, allowing us to see a face on the moon or in rock formations on cliffs. Our inclination to seek out geometric patterns is so intrinsic to who we are and how we work that we have to actually work hard to overcome it and stop our minds from playing tricks on us. Ironically, the ability to do that is itself rooted in understanding geometry. For instance, the equally boring yet paradoxically fascinating subject of geology relies heavily on geometry and helps us to explain how various rock formations form naturally, accounting for the development of formations that seem to have faces. Delve into the history and study of geometry, and you unlock the door to some of the greatest discoveries of humanity, some of the most important moments in history, not just scientifically but also socio-politically, with the rise and fall of empires and leaders, from the ancient Egyptians to the Romans to Napoleon and even to the present day, and to many of the greatest achievements of our humble species that inhabits one small planet and one small moment in history in a vast ocean of space and time. You even unlock the door to the evolution and inner workings of the human mind itself. Ask anybody who studies geometry, and you'll probably find that it is both the most boring and mind-bendingly difficult subject to get your head around, and at the same time one of the most important and fascinating subjects ever studied in the history of humanity. Exploring the history and application of geometry, it's easy to see how it's difficult to speak about what this branch of mathematics has to offer us without resorting to the use of romantic and emotive language. It literally offers us the opportunity to begin to understand our place in the universe, ensure our survival as a species, and help us explore beyond our own atmosphere. Geometry has given us the power of flight, got us into space, and even allowed us to walk on the moon. It has enabled us to fling man-made objects even outside our own solar system. It's not hyperbolic to state that without geometry, it is impossible to understand modern science, or even have it in the first place. And what geometry has to offer us is demonstrably far more amazing and profound than what we find being presented by the woo peddlers and charlatans of sacred geometry. When you look at the world around you, and especially the achievements of humanity, every building, every vehicle, every household appliance, everything that defines civilization, you are literally watching geometry in action. Remember that the next time someone talks to you about this arguably tedious and difficult subject. Without it, you wouldn't have the life that you do.
And welcome to the next section of the Throwing Away Logic show. And we're welcoming back someone from the charity show. Very quickly, you'll probably know him. Welcoming back Ollie, our philosophy tube. How are you doing, mate?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, like I say, and again, I have to thank you for the short notice you came in on the charity show. That was really good of you to do that.
It was my pleasure, absolutely my pleasure.
It should be Lundi here asking he's more of the philosophy expert, so I hope you don't mind, like a complete noob to philosophy fighting these
that's all right.
very basic questions. But what we're here today is to talk about, obviously, the popularization of philosophy and philosophy for the masses. So I'm going to start off with probably the one question you get probably like when you're at a party or someone, and yeah, you already know what I'm going to say. They'll say, "Oh, what do you do?" "I'm a student. I study philosophy." And then they'll probably scrunch their face up and wonder, what the hell? So how do you usually respond to that?
Well, actually twice I've had somebody confuse it with psychology to my face. They say, "Oh, what's that then?" And I go, "Well, it's the attempt to answer meaningful questions non-empirically, often using conceptual analysis." And they kind of go, "You what?" And I'm like, okay, so science tries to answer empirical questions like what is the sun made of and how do plants work and stuff like that. Questions that you need to answer by, going out and looking. But there are certain meaningful questions that no amount of going and looking will go and tell you. Yeah. Will tell you the answers to. And at this point people go, wait, do you mean like spiritual questions? I'm like, no, bear with me, okay? So questions like, in virtue of what is a statement true? Or any question of the form, what should I do? Those are the kinds of questions which do make sense and which are worth thinking about. But you couldn't go out and do an experiment that would tell you what it means to make a statement true. So that's where we come in. That's what philosophers do. We try and answer questions like that. So we try and answer these meaningful questions, but in a empirical way. And at that point people go, okay, cool. Nice weather we're having at the moment, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's lovely. Yeah. Because you usually lose them by that point.
And because the other thing I've encountered is basically the stereotype of philosophers. You know, it's just a bunch of folk talking about stuff that really doesn't matter or
it's just the meaning of words, isn't it? Yeah. You're just arguing about definitions of words, aren't you? I'm like, no.
Yeah, kind of, dusty old professors and dusty old ivory towers just arguing over really menial, pointless stuff.
Professor Bob died 5 years ago. We didn't even notice. Yeah, there is a stereotype of it, which is being challenged in a lot of ways, not just by me, but particularly online actually it's being challenged. There's a growing group of online intellectuals, which is quite nice, not just for philosophy, but for other arts and humanities disciplines as well. Because education online is quite dominated by science, but there is a growing arts and humanities section. People like the Lit Crit guy on Twitter giving out literary criticism in tweet form. And Dr. Bagini, who was on the charity podcast with me, who writes a lot of excellent books for the public about philosophy and what it is that we do, the kinds of questions that we deal with. So it is getting better. We are slowly challenging that stereotype, but there are still some people who are just like, don't quite understand what we do.
Yeah. So I think one question, how would you define philosophy? What actually is it?
Ooh, that is a very interesting question. It's something I actually wrote a paper on recently and submitted to the Royal Institute of Philosophy. I wasn't entirely confident in my definition, but I think, if I remember, the definition I offered was the attempt to answer meaningful questions non-empirically, often using conceptual analysis, where formal logic is concerned, see also mathematics. To give it to you in a soundbite. So like I said, it's the attempt to answer those non-empirical questions, usually by thinking about the meaning of a concept. So say, okay, what does this idea mean? What does it mean for something to be true? And people will offer suggestions, and then people say, oh, well, that doesn't work because what if you think about this? That's something else. And they say, oh, okay, yeah, well, what if we try it this way? And you just try and figure it out in your head, and you make all these little logical moves, and you try and come up with a theory as to what beauty is, or what creativity is, or what truth is, or how time works. That's interesting. Or what makes modal statements true. That's one of my favorites is, so if you say something like, grass might have been blue, that seems like a meaningful statement, and it seems like a true statement as well. It's like, oh, well, if the world was slightly different, grass could have been blue. But in virtue of what is that statement true? Because by definition, it's about the way the world isn't. So there's nothing in the world that could make it true. It's not like the distance between Vancouver and New York is so many miles, where there's something in the world that makes it true. It seems to be true, but there's nothing kind of lying around that would make it true. So we think about what might make a modal statement true. Those kinds of questions are very interesting as well.
Yeah. Just to bring us to more specific here in the UK, do you really think that philosophy should be introduced earlier on and maybe even be mandatory in schools? Like even just some basic introductions for children?
Well, I'm not an educational expert, and I'm probably pretty biased on that question as well. So my answer should be taken with a pinch of salt, and it's by no means authoritative. I think it would be nice. I think personally it would have been nice if I'd been exposed to a little bit of philosophy earlier in school, because I only got exposed to it at A-level when I was sort of 17, 18. Yeah. And it was only then that I discovered that I had a passion and a moderate ability at it. So it would have been nice if I'd been able to do it a little bit earlier, because those sorts of questions do start to occur to you when you start entering adolescence, particularly. People start to think, oh, what does this really mean? And why do we have this that way? Why is it not some other way? And particularly with regards to the kind of society they live in. When people enter that kind of adolescent age, they start to ask questions like, so we have all these institutions, what's the rationale behind them? Why trial by a jury of peers? Where did that come from? Why democracy? Who invented this, and why is it a good idea? And why should I be nice to other people? That sort of thing. So it might have been personally nice if I'd been able to do it a little earlier, or at least known that there were other people having a systematic attempt to answer those questions. Although, again, I'm not an educational expert. I'm not a qualified teacher, although teaching in big air quotes is kind of what I do. So I couldn't offer an authoritative answer on it. But personally, it would have been nice. Yes.
Yeah, because just something else to follow on from that. So, say like you come across a person who just absolutely just doesn't have a clue to philosophy. How do you kind of nudge them into it? Like, is there a thing where you can say, look, here's some philosophy for it, and you probably don't even realize you're doing it half the time?
Well, yeah, sometimes the paradigm question I usually go to is, what makes a statement true? People go, I've never thought about that. What does, I make true statements, what makes them true? And I'm like, well, how do you distinguish a true statement from a false one? And they go, that's very good. And I say, questions like, have you ever seen someone asleep or, under anesthetic? I remember I did medical work experience back when, my parents were keen on me to look at medicine, and I watched an operation taking place, and there was a patient there who was under anesthetic. And I remember thinking, I wonder where the guy actually is, because this is his body and he's asleep, but it's not just like normal asleep like you do at night. He's anesthetized. His brain is totally knocked out. He's gone. So I was like, well, there's a sense in which he's not really here, in which he's not in the room. So, yeah, you kind of introduce them by way of questions like that. And yeah, sometimes people go, oh, that sounds kind of dull. And I'm like, well, there's a lot of variety in it as well, and that's one of the things I love about studying it, is because people will come home at my university and they'll say, I studied these features of rocks today, or, and I studied this economic theory today. And I'm like, well, in the morning I talked about what the concept of beauty is, and over lunch I wrote the definition of creativity. Now I'm wondering about how time works and whether the passage of time is illusory. So much variety and so much you can work on. People spend whole lifetimes on tiny, tiny bits of philosophy. It's great. It's so broad. So, yeah, people do sometimes write it off if they don't know exactly what it is and confuse it with psychology, unfortunately, which does
there was one, and I'm sorry if you're listening to this, whoever it is, who I can't quote exactly, but the example they came up with, what they use is whiskey, and it just says, take a good malt. Is it a good malt because it's objectively a good malt, or is it just everyone's opinion it's a good malt? What actually makes it a good malt whiskey?
I like that.
Yes.
I do like that. That's a good
Obviously
one.
a Scotsman would come up with something like that.
That's very good. I like that.
Yeah. I can't, honestly, and whoever came up with that, I'm sorry if I'm not crediting it. I just thought there was some blog about how to introduce people to philosophy.
I do like that. It's a good idea.
Yeah, because it is like, how do we know that what is a good malt, or a good beer, or a good
or
meal?
really good anything. A good life, in fact.
So, like, kind of moving a little bit on from that, there's one thing that I've really noticed in day to day, and there's someone like my dad, and my dad, he's as Scottish as they are, he's very proud, but, one day I mentioned David Hume to him, and he just had a blank look on his face.
Really?
And I think I've encountered that a lot in Scotland. I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, I have encountered that. So people don't know who someone like David Hume is, and you really don't know.
Be proud of David Hume.
Yeah, and I'm coming up across, in Scotland especially, and the UK, they don't realise kind of the rich kind of philosophical history that they have.
Absolutely, yeah. The Enlightenment definitely was.
Where do you think we've gone wrong in that kind of?
Oh, well, I wouldn't want to comment authoritatively on Scottish culture and what exactly is wrong with the country, And I do live in Scotland. But it's a shame that people don't know more about the achievements of Scottish philosophy, especially Hume, because some of Hume's arguments are still good today, particularly Hume on Miracles, which is one of the first bits of proper philosophy I actually read when I was quite young, is still quite a powerful knockdown argument to people who believe in miracles. And sometimes you do bump into them and you say, oh, what about this? And they go, oh, whoa, that's kind of, never thought about that. And it's like, well, it's been knocking around for 200 years. It's public domain, man. So it's a shame that people don't know more about that. And he's got a big statue in Edinburgh as well. Do people just think that the statue's of a guy who had a very shiny toe and everyone touches the toe for no reason?
In my view, I think it is because Scotland's always got this close association with engineering and science.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel that in popular culture, like that seems to kind of steal the thunder from philosophy a lot of the time.
Well, Hume would have liked engineering and science. He was an empiricist. He would have liked all that focus on data and experimentation. He would have loved that.
Do you feel that just in general, like maybe like science is getting more of the limelight than philosophy is?
Oh, absolutely. In general terms, yeah. Philosophy has its own set of unique challenges that make it difficult to popularize. And of course, philosophy's been free for longer than science has. Science has been constrained by cultural forces until relatively recently, and is still fairly constrained as well. Whereas, philosophy had its big enlightenment a while ago, and there's been various periods of intense philosophical activity, whereas science is really only just getting going, which is nice. it's good. Yeah, I mean, there is this dichotomy that people present between philosophy and science, which is a real shame, because people like me who love both and have studied both, I've done philosophy, but I've also done, chemistry and biology and physics and astronomy. People like me who love both end up feeling very trapped and feeling like, I always feel like I'm cheating on one of them when I talk about the other. And also people assume that you don't know anything about science when you do philosophy. And they're like, what about this scientific theory? And I'm like, actually, special relativity doesn't say that. It says the following. And they're like, whoa! So that's kind of fun. But yeah, science does get more of the limelight. I mean, look at the big celebrities, people like Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson, or rock stars. Professor Brian Cox, he's kind of the Bill Nye of the UK. I mean, even to take a bit of a tangential example, look at the Avengers. 2 out of the Avengers are scientists. Yeah. Tony Stark and Bruce Banner are both men of science. And I don't think that on its own tells us anything significantly, because, one of them also has a beard, so what? I think what's significant is that none of them are philosophers. There's nobody who's a critical thinker. There aren't any. I don't know if there are any philosopher superheroes. I don't know the entire superhero canon. There might be some somewhere, but yeah, philosophers tend to take more of a back seat, and people seem to think of it as quite a cloistered and sequestered activity. Yeah. And it's not thought of as being as sexy and as cool as science, but that's fine. Science is really sexy and it's really cool, and it is having its day in the limelight, which is nice. But yeah, generally it does get more attention. I think certainly more funding as well.
Yeah. This is another thing I read online, but they said all the funding you need for philosophy is a pen and paper, isn't it?
Yeah, well, of course, science does need a lot more funding, because you need to build, big hadron colliders and experiments and go out and collect a lot of data and stuff. I think philosophy probably needs slightly more funding than just a pen and paper, because otherwise you could just provide university students with pens and paper and they would come up with it, and that is demonstrably not the case. But yeah, obviously it does need less funding than science. It might be nice if there was a slightly more exposure to it in the public. I know there's a little bit more of that recently, online, as well as I think there's a series on BBC Radio 4 about philosophy stuff.
Because the other thing that's kind of links is people have another impression about learning philosophy is you've got to learn all this history as well that goes with it.
No.
Yeah, it's just the impression a lot of people, because you always see, Kant said this or Aristotle said that.
Yeah, there is a certain amount of that. I find learning the history quite interesting, because sometimes you say, Plato says this, and you're like, what? That seems so weird. Why did he say that? And then you do a little bit of digging and you find, there was this cultural concern going on at the time, and that's why he's talking about this. So you do learn a little bit of history, and you do certainly go over the good ideas. Yeah. But you're not just quoting them as authorities saying, this is their truth because so-and-so said it. I don't think you really do that any more than you might say in a scientific subject. Say, Kepler discovered this, or Newton discovered this, or Einstein discovered this, and nobody goes, Einstein, always banging on and on about Einstein, always going on about him. We never, do some new stuff, and people are like, well, no, because it's important. So, yeah, we do that in philosophy as well. Certainly, at university level, you do get to be more on the cutting edge. At school, at least in my experience, which admittedly is only of one person doing one A-level, it was a little more focused on the historical. So Descartes said this and Kant said that and so on, and you need to know how they work and the possible replies to them. And there wasn't as much contemporary stuff. Whereas once you get to university, at least where I am, I'm reading papers and books that came out this year, theories that were developed just last year about the nature of time, and some papers that haven't even been published yet. And you get really, really cutting edge. Like one of my professors, I remember, it was absolutely mind-blowing. He wrote a paper in just 2 years ago with an argument that he thinks proves that the passage of time is illusory. And I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. This is like incredibly recent stuff. Well, I say recent. If the passage of time is illusory, then it's recent in big inverted commas. No, that was actually quite funny, because in the lecture when he showed us his argument that the passage of time was illusory, the lecture finished 5 minutes late. He was like, oh, sorry if I was there. He was like, over the next 2 hours, I'm going to tell you that time is illusory. Wait, what? So it's difficult to, it makes grammar very difficult, certainly. But yeah, I mean, certainly at my level, you get to operate a bit more on the cutting edge. So, no, you don't always have to trudge through history, and even the times when you do have to learn about history, I find that quite interesting.
Yeah. Another thing from that is the jargon, and I know this puts a lot of people off. Again, this is just, I don't know if it's just the ones but there's some philosophers, they don't communicate very well, and they're very jargon heavy, and people just, their eyes glaze over and they say, bugger this, I'm going elsewhere.
Yeah, the philosophy jargon's particularly insidious as well, because it creeps up on you and you don't realize quite that you're using it until people are going, whoa, back up, and you're like, wait, what, did you not know what this means? So, yeah, sometimes things like empiricism and determinism and a lot of isms, sometimes people can kind of get those, they've heard of those. But then some of the Latin ones, a priori, a posteriori, people are like, whoa, what? And sometimes even, the names of the actual disciplines in philosophy, like epistemology and metaphysics, people are like, whoa, you're kind of losing me here. Because you don't realize that you're doing it, because you've been immersed in it for so long, and these become the words that you use for the concepts, that you're playing around with. Meta-ethical naturalism is something that would quite happily roll off my tongue, but some people might be like, wait, what the heck is that? That's just nonsense. I thought it was the name of a horse I saw last week. But yeah, I thought it'd be a great name for a horse, actually. But, yeah, you don't always realize that you're using the jargon, so you do have to kind of stop and be clear. And certainly that's something that I've found with the YouTube channel is, sometimes I'll include a word in the script and then they're like, oh wait, no, I should probably just include a little side note to say what that means. And sometimes I'm like, I used this in a previous video. How do you not know what it is? But yeah, you kind of always have to make sure that people are on the same page. There is a lot of jargon. But again, linking back to the science thing, there's a lot of jargon in science as well. I guess people are more steeped in scientific culture and science jargon nowadays than they used to be. So people are slightly more familiar with that. People kind of have a grasp of what relativity might mean. Whereas if you just said relativity generally, people might be like, wait, what? And you go, no, like Einstein relativity. Okay, that's something to do with space and light, right? So people have more of an idea what the science jargon means. But I don't know if there's more jargon in philosophy than there is in other subjects. So you have to do a study to confirm that, I think.
And also, I think it probably helps whereas science is it's more sort of tangible for people.
Yeah,
like if
absolutely.
If you try and explain relativity, you can, just draw a diagram or something, whereas
yeah. Although some people
I can't even remember that one you just said, but you say that to someone and it doesn't register anything.
Yeah.
Whereas the word relativity on its own and Einstein, it registers something in the brain.
Yeah, they've heard of that guy, whereas they're like, wait, meta-ethical who, what? The what, who, where? Although relativity might not have been a great example on my part, because I remember the first time I learned about special relativity, I was like, wait, what? Nah. What? Light's the same speed everywhere you measure it? No, it's not. That's ridiculous. And they're like, no, genuinely it is. I promise. Go and test it. I was like, okay, fine. Yeah.
There's one thing I've always been, a lot of people have different responses to the philosophers I've met. And that is, what is, just say the average office worker, how are they using philosophy in their day-to-day life? Just say someone who goes 9 to 5 and they're working in admin or something like that. And they're probably thinking, philosophy's got nothing to do with me. I just sit here and do my spreadsheet. Can you think of a way that they would actually be employing some philosophy each day?
That's a very interesting question, actually. I guess, certainly if you come up against some kind of moral dilemma, if you think, what should I do? What's the right thing to do here? Maybe my coworker's slacking off. Should I report them? Is that the right thing to do? Certainly some kind of critical moral thinking there takes place. People say, it'll make him unhappy. And, I don't want to make people unhappy, but at the same time, you shouldn't be doing that. And there's some sense in which it's deserved. So certainly, moral questions would be one great big example. I guess my favorite example of philosophy that gets used every day and is practically applicable is feminism, which is, absolutely wonderful application of practical ethics and is becoming increasingly significant and certainly should do. It's absolutely wonderful. So if anyone's engaging in debates like that, or politics as well, if you're doing politics, saying, I wonder who I should vote for, or should I vote, or should I support this environmental policy, or why should I, who cares, I'll be dead in 500 years, what are my obligations to people in the future? People think about that sort of thing. And then sometimes in their slightly more relaxed moments, people think, I wonder what so-and-so even means. Why am I even doing spreadsheets? What are spreadsheets? Where is the spreadsheet? Is it in the computer? What is it? Is it a file? What's going on? So sometimes if people have a bit more time, they might engage with something deeper, but certainly politics and practical ethics would be the two big examples that jump out.
Because I think that was, obviously our audience is well aware there was a slight political thing in Scotland recently.
Oh, yes.
But I thought that was fantastic at the time. I mean, we're not going to go into which side was better, but I mean, the engagement people had, and I did hear some really bad arguments, but overall I thought people day to day, they were engaging in really good debates. It was quite refreshing to hear that.
In fact, where I was, they closed the polls early because everyone had voted. Everyone's already turned up and voted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but like, for that, especially the last month, it was fantastic some people were sick of it, but I said, it's great to hear this. Like, people are actually debating, like, proper issues for a change.
Absolutely, it was fantastic.
For
some reason, I certainly, one of the debates I got caught up in, with a friend of mine is it right that I should vote? Because I got to vote in that. I'm not Scottish. I'm not even one of those English people who pretends to be Scottish at parties by just wearing a kilt. And you say, oh, what part of Scotland are you from? And they go, Kent. So I got to vote in that because I've been living in Scotland for a few years. And I had quite a serious debate with a friend of mine. Like, is it right that I should vote? Am I morally entitled to vote on this issue for Scotland? So yeah, it was really great to see people getting quite engaged with that. Where I was, it was certainly in a friendly way as well, which is...
Yeah. Because I actually had that debate. My brother lives in Dubai and he didn't have the vote.
Yeah, I'm just saying, there are some people who were born in Scotland and live here for 20, 30 years and then they move abroad and they can't vote, but I can. I was like, what?
And yeah, it was, well, with him it was that, and I have my Polish friend who lives a few doors along, and he's lived here 2 years and he was entitled to vote, and I remember having a lengthy debate with him about it. So. But yeah, it really energized people in a really good way to, debate, because there is a very, I think in the UK we do, like, try and keep these things to us. We don't want to upset people, But it was good to see people just being out about it and engaging in the discussion.
I've actually fallen foul of that a few times, because in philosophy you get used to saying, oh really? You get used to saying, why do you think that? Or, what's your reason for saying that? In a perfectly friendly way. And sometimes you can get caught out if you do that in settings that aren't ready for it. There was a discussion I was having with a few people who I just met a while ago, on like a drama school 2-week course, and it got quite spiritual, and people were saying, I think we have souls and I think everything happens for a reason and so on. And I said, why do you think that? What are your reasons for this? In an honest, inquiring way. And they got quite upset. They were like, no, don't question, like, that's so mean for you to do this. And I was like, no, I'm sincere. I'm not trying to tear it down. I'm just looking. I want to see what's there. So you do have to be careful, because people can be a little touchy if they say, I think this, and you go, why? So you kind of have to be a bit gentle sometimes. You get used to being a little more rigorous with your thoughts than people might be used to. Yeah,
because I have noticed like some people, when they engage in philosophers, they get so frustrated with it as well. But I think it's just, like I say, they're not used to that kind of level of questioning.
They're like, no, I know what I mean. Just do it. Just do this. This is a reason to do this. And it's like, no, it's not a reason to do this. It doesn't work. People can get annoyed because they can sometimes feel that you're just chipping away and picking holes in things and just pulling at the threads. And you've got to be careful not to end up trolling with logic.
Thank you. Because like another example I have is, like, the past few weeks I've been reading Nigel Warburton's book, The Basics.
Oh yeah.
I've been reading that at work, and I have been asked a few times, people looking at it, why the bleep are you reading that? Well, I work in an engineer's workshop, so the language will be a Scottish engineering workshop at that, so the language is quite colourful. They say, what the hell would you read that for? That's a waste of time. Well, engineering, we're applying a lot of things that are in this book day to day, like we're constructing and designing things. Like I say, if you read this book, you'd be amazed how much of this you're using day to day.
Really? Wow.
Well, I find it definitely an engineer. Well, like, we're doing research and design, so there's a lot of arguing for, my idea is the good, we'll do this, this, and this. And people don't realize they're using all these methods of putting their arguments forward.
Absolutely. People sometimes don't realize that they're using concepts that perhaps aren't entirely clear. I'm doing a whole module at the moment on what is creativity. Yeah. So people sometimes say, that's very creative, and I'll be like, is it? Really? What does that mean? Does that mean it's new? Does it mean it's valuable? And people say, it just means this. And you're like, well, that can't be right because of this, and this. And I'm like, oh, shut up. Why did we even invite you to this party?
It's the old story I remember. That it was my maths teacher told me this. There was one day the caretaker was out putting the lines on the football pitch, and he had like a pen and paper to figure out the angles, and he saw that he was using Pythagoras for one of these. And he went to him, you're using Pythagoras. They said, what the hell are you talking about? I'm doing maths here. But it's just, it's something I come across. A lot of people don't realize where all these concepts come from, and they just say, it's just apparent kind of thing.
They thought that these things were just lying around, and
yeah.
It's like,
it was just that.
You have to sit down and figure that out.
They say, "Oh, I'm not doing any of that fancy rubbish. This is mathematics." It's just
That's good.
so. Like, I mean, how do you feel like the efforts to popularise philosophy are currently going? Because I have noticed there is a bit of a surge right now, and because a few years ago it did suffer from the image of, the kind of ivory tower intellectuals, kind of, just, with their heads in the clouds. But it does seem to be, I mean, someone like Stephen Law, for example, like, I think Lundi, who isn't here at the moment, he's always called, like, he's almost kind of the rock star philosopher now, even from the way he dresses to the way he speaks and that.
Yeah, it's, I certainly think it's going well. Things are getting better. Like I said before, there's certainly on the internet, there's a growing, community of people trying to do it. Not just me, but certain other institutions are starting to cotton on to the fact that the internet is very valuable for these sort of things. Not quite as quickly as I would like in some cases. I write to a lot of universities and to a lot of institutions, and I say, hey, I've got this project that's about philosophy on the internet, and it's got so many people watching it, and they go, internet? What? Internet? No, what is internet? We're not doing that. That's for, people to put cat videos and things on. I'm like, well, it is that, if that's all you let it be, then it is. But yeah, certainly the internet is helping and the situation is improving, and there are some quite high quality books coming out, again, to plug Dr. Bagini, his books are excellent and certainly helped me get into philosophy. People like Daniel Dennett as well are certainly popularizing philosophy quite effectively, because he actually writes philosophy in a rhetorically interesting way, and it's a way that's interesting to read. I mean, I think philosophy is interesting to read generally, but one of the things that makes it difficult to popularize is that the vogue at the moment is to write philosophy that's very, very clear, and you try and make it as simple as possible, and you don't include little rhetorical flourishes and little jokes and stuff. Although some people do. Of course, I say to try and make it simple. That doesn't always make it simple, but just to try and keep it absolutely black and white, to be as clear as you can be. And people don't often have an eye to style when they're writing their papers. They're more interested in the arguments, which is fine, because that's what we're trying to do. But it does make it difficult to give to somebody who's not a philosophy nerd, who's not already interested in this question. You say, this is really fascinating, and they're like, well, this is boring to read. Like, even if it's a fascinating question, like in virtue of what a modal statement's true, people are like, well, this is so dry. And you have to kind of be a keen bean to get past the dryness in some cases. So it is difficult to adapt, but I think the situation is improving.
Yeah. Do you think, and I know the second you mention this name, it divides, Richard Dawkins, when he did the God Delusion, because I kind of feel a lot of the interest in like the sciences and the philosophy enjoyed because of that book, regardless of what side people took it, just because it was popular and people read it, and I think they just went, well, why is he saying this or why is he saying that? And I'm going to go and have a look at these topics further. I think that's kind of been a really good center point for it all.
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right in that case. I won't express a strong opinion either way, on Professor Dawkins, but people do say he's a zoologist rather than a philosopher, but I have read The God Delusion, a couple of times, and I think you're probably right. It was a very interesting focal point, possibly because it was so inflammatory and people got so riled up about it, so a lot of people read it and thought, oh, what is this? And since a lot of people, I think, were keen to either defend it very strongly or argue against it very strongly, people really got to grips with the arguments and thought about it. So, yeah, you're probably right, actually. That would have been a good, although I guess that's a testable hypothesis. If we wanted to say that the God Delusion was important in popularizing philosophy, we would have to look at the date at which it came out and then see how many philosophy blogs and channels and books came out afterwards compared to before, and see if there was a trend. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that was true.
Yeah, because sometimes it takes something like that. Maybe someone who's not, an amazing philosopher, but just puts something out there that's just
someone who's certainly capable of forming an argument and at least thinking relatively clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, because I definitely did notice there was a big interest in debates after that. Formal debating definitely became for years before that, I'd never even watched any. Then after that, I was quite keen to see debates with, atheists and Christians and discussions and all that.
They're hugely popular on YouTube. Oh yeah. There's a massive apologetics and counter-apologetics community on YouTube. These huge channels are battling back and forth all the time that I've very much tried to stay away from But yeah, it is very interesting. People are interested in debate now, which is nice. Debate does have its limitations, I think, or depending on the style in which you conduct it. I've got a university debating society, obviously, as a lot of universities do, and I've been to a few and I've spoken at a few, and sometimes debate can prioritize style over substance, and sometimes it's nice to take a little bit more of a sedate approach and figure out an argument on your own. But people obviously people ain't got time for that. So it's nice that debate, and certainly the spirit of friendly debate and inquisitive debate is growing and is alive and well.
Yeah, just honest debate, kind of.
Yeah, trying to figure out the truth rather than
or just exchanging the ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, that is kind of one thing I have noticed. There is a slight thing now where it's the win at all costs style. There is some of that going on.
I noticed that in a few debates, and it's why I don't do more debates here at the universities. Sometimes I speak to the speakers and I say, behind the scenes before the debate, and I say, what's your argument? And they go, I'm not really going to argue, but I'm going to try and set up my opponent to say this or set him up to waste his time. And I'm like, oh, that's a shame that something. And sometimes I go along to the debates and they invite floor speeches at the end, and I've been known to stand up and say, actually, and then bring in some philosophical argument, which sounds great, and then ends up convincing absolutely nobody, because people are like, what? Nah, that can't be right, nah. And I'm like, no, the argument works, seriously. In fact, they give out a prize for the best floor speech. And a while ago, there was a debate on the morality of legalizing drugs. And I won't say which side of that I'm actually on, but I gave a speech for the side I'm not on. I gave a speech that included a bad argument, because I was actually hoping somebody would make that speech so I could explain why it didn't work. And nobody did, so I said, I'll just give the bad argument then. And I won the prize. They go, it's really good, really good. I was like, no, it isn't. It doesn't work. Don't give it to me. But yeah, it's fun. It's nice that debating is on the rise. It is a fun pastime if you've got the guts for it.
So is there any kind of quick tips you could give to anyone listening? Like how they could, just form their argument, like, well, we'll use the analogy of someone going into work tomorrow and, their boss is trying to introduce, I don't know, that they don't get their half day on a Friday or something, that they'll go to work the whole. How would you say to someone, like, how do you go about, like, putting your, in the best possible way, like how philosophy can help them in that situation?
Well, you've got to remember in that situation, it isn't just your arguments, but also the way you put them across. So there's a certain amount of negotiation tactics which are always useful in that as well. In philosophy, it's a very sort of open, friendly domain that we work in, and people can put forward ideas, and nobody's going to say, that's dumb, that's stupid, and be snippy about it. People would say, no, I'm not sure that quite works. So, unfortunately, the real world isn't always like that. So, if you're going to put across philosophical points, I would say, always try and be friendly and be genuine and sincere. If you think something doesn't work, don't say that's dumb or that's stupid. It's kind of, I'm not entirely sure that works. Certainly if you're trying to negotiate with somebody, I've always found it useful to focus on what they want rather than the specific demands they made. So if your boss wants you to stay an extra 2 hours, say why is it that you want that? Is there some job that needs doing? Could I get that done another time? So I certainly find negotiation skills are often quite good when applying philosophy in real life. But in terms of actually applying the discipline itself, I guess think about whether what they're saying follows from the premises. Is it the case that you have to stay an extra 2 hours after work, or is there some other way that this could be done? Is this a good reason to do something? And is there some standard you can appeal to that is either outside of your preferences, so it's not just, well, I would prefer not to, but there's actually some other reason. And is there some common standard in particular that you can appeal to? Can you say, no, that will actually present a problem which we both don't want to happen for these reasons? So, there's a book I read by the Harvard negotiation team called Getting to Yes, which is very useful for applying arguments in the real world, especially with a focus on the negotiation angle. But yeah, I'd say stay calm and think about what follows from what and work through each step carefully. And also know when you're in the wrong and be gracious. If you've made an argument and somebody says, no, that doesn't work, be prepared to say, oh yeah, actually you're right, I concur, that doesn't follow from what I said, I retract it. And people are ashamed of being wrong or making mistakes, which is a shame. People shouldn't be worried about that. You know, everybody makes mistakes. People make mistakes every day, and in not only what they believe, but in what they say and how they act. And people are afraid of being made to look a fool if they say something and then they think, oh God, I've got to stick to my guns. And it's like, no, well, we're all trying to find the truth. We're all trying to find the best course of action or the best work schedule that'll mean everyone gets a fair shift and the jobs get done or whatever. So yeah, I'd say probably apply those ideas and be prepared to have them applied to yourself as well.
Yeah. Because I do notice, well, especially if we talk about the online world, admitting you're wrong, obviously, you've probably seen plenty of comment sections where that goes.
Plenty of comment sections I have seen, but my comment section in particular tends to be absolutely lovely.
All right.
Overwhelmingly, 99% of the people who comment on my channel are sincere and genuine and honest and lovely, and they do indeed have debates in the comments, and people sometimes make arguments. Someone says, oh, actually, fair enough, that doesn't work. I'm sorry. Thanks for helping me clear it up. Not always, but most of the time. Overwhelmingly.
What can you recommend to people for some good starting points for philosophy?
Ooh, I get this question a lot. People
people
always mail into me saying, oh, I want to read philosophy. What should I read first? And usually they've been reading something that maybe wasn't quite so good. So I had a 14-year-old kid from America who emailed me recently and said, oh, I've been reading Nietzsche recently. And I was like, okay.
Right.
You know, Nietzsche's great and all, but, I've managed to do pretty much a whole MA without opening much Nietzsche, and that, I think, tells you something. And I guess that ties into the fact that a lot of contemporary and cutting-edge philosophy maybe isn't available because it's behind journal paywalls and such, but that's another topic for another time. In terms of what people should start with, the kind of honest, open, inquiring spirit saying, does this work or does that work? Does this follow from this? Plato's dialogues are still a pretty good place. Not all of them. Some of them are a bit, but Plato's Euthyphro is always a very, very good one. It's nice and clear. It's nice and easy to read. It's quite fun to read as well because Plato did have an eye for the rhetoric that we were talking about earlier on, and he did try and make it engaging and try and make it fun. And also the Euthyphro dilemma is really freaking funny. Socrates is such a troll. Socrates is trolling with logic in that. He's taking the piss. You can see the grin on his face when he's saying this stuff. So that's good. Some of Hume's shorter essays are quite good for, again, getting in the analytical mindset. Hume's essay on the standard of taste is good. Hume on miracles, I think that's section 10 of the inquiry, I think. Happy to be corrected on that if that's not true. That's another good one. Again, not too long, nice and clear, works it through step by step. So that's pretty good. And also crucially, those things are available. They're free. You can get those online anyway. You don't have to buy the book or anything. So yeah, those are some good starting points. I mean, those are historical certainly, and it would be nice if people could read more modern philosophy. So when I come across a paper that's free and that's available online, I usually try and include it in the link if I've made a video. So there are cutting edge papers out there. There's a paper by Leif Waynar on the resource curse, which you can get for free. If you just Google Leif Waynar or resource curse, you can find that. That's a good one. So that would be a good introduction to the philosophy of global justice, which is a very growing field. And that's something that people might not have thought about before. It's about who owns natural resources and how we should divvy them up and so on. So, yeah, probably avoid jumping straight in with Kant, because Kant's tough. And some of what Kant says is absolutely wonderful and fantastic. And some of what Kant says is a little bit like, wow, really? That's a little crazy. So, yeah, the texts that I recommend are usually historical because they're available for free, but don't just fall into the trap of thinking that all good philosophy was written 200, 2,000 years ago. There's certainly stuff out there that you can get that will give you a flavor of what it is today, which will also be free and easy to understand. But those are good places to start, I think.
Yeah, because I've heard like Wittgenstein as well. That's just weird.
Yeah, Wittgenstein's nuts, man.
Yeah, I've heard like it'll kind of give you a headache trying to read his stuff.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And I know because Lundi has appeared in the chat room and he's a Wittgenstein fan. So.
Oh really?
Yeah. Because I've heard he's very kind of esoteric. Really, that's a bit.
Yes, he is. I've not actually read much Wittgenstein because probably just the modules I've chosen. I don't end up studying everything. I've had it open some Wittgenstein before. It's tough stuff. It's very tough. Well, but yeah, that's what happens. Probably try and avoid some of the harder, more off the wall stuff. when you're starting out. Because there are people out there who are very, very clear. Daniel Dennett's another one who writes very clear philosophy, and it's engaging to read. Some of his books are quite long, and if you've got an eye to science as well, some of his books are kind of philosophy/science. His book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, was quite a good one. That's got some philosophy in it, specifically about the philosophy of creativity and intelligence and mind. A lot of people are into sort of computing and technology. Then there are some books and some papers on AI, which a lot of people might find interesting. Margaret Bowden wrote a book called The Creative Mind, which talks a lot about artificial intelligence and what creativity is and whether a computer could be creative. Tim Crane's The Mechanical Mind, that's another one that's pretty good. These are just little suggestions of things that I've picked up recently, which are quite clear and quite good.
Just to add, I read Nigel Warburton's book. I recommend that thoroughly. If you're a complete newbie to it, he really breaks everything.
I've not had a chance to pick it up myself.
Philosophy the Basics, it's called.
Philosophy the Basics, oh cool.
Yeah, and I haven't had a chance to read any of Baggini's stuff, but I do know it comes in very highly recommended.
100%. Particularly if you're sort of school age. That's very good. I mean, you've got to be pretty clever school age. And I wasn't trying to insinuate that he was writing for audiences who weren't mature at all. But Dr. Baggini's stuff. The Pig Who Wants to Be Eaten, I think.
I remember
was one that I read. And Do They Think You're Stupid? That's another good one. It's like a book of fallacies. Yeah. That's very good.
Okay, I think we're over the 45, so we'll wrap this up here. As always, we allow our guests to have a little soapbox moment if they're, just anything you want to encourage people to go to, or, shout your channel out, or any of your work, you're free to do so.
That's very kind of you to say. I do present Philosophy Tube. That's the YouTube channel that I do, and I have videos every Friday, and we talk about philosophy, and sometimes I talk about a film or a book that embodies a particular theory. So that's quite nice. Yeah, and it's a wonderful little community on YouTube. People are very open and honest and kind. We welcome new people if you'd like to come along and join in, and I always talk about the comments that I've got the previous week at the end of every episode. So if people are interested in watching Philosophy Tube, that's very lovely. It baffles me how many people are really interested in it and how quickly it's growing. It's nearly 14,000 people now, which is that's more people than study or work at my university in total, which is nuts. But if people do want to come and watch Philosophy Tube, then they're very welcome to.
And just to let everyone know, I know we've agreed to this and we keep meaning to do it. You've agreed with Lundi in his philosophy sections of our show. I think you have agreed to team up at some point. We spoke about this months ago, and I know Lundi, we'll be speaking to him after we've done this interview. He'll be here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I have an awful memory. So
yeah, right. Yeah, Lundi does.
We've had this conversation.
Yeah, Lundi does a special 5-10 minute segment on our podcast called Philosophy 101. So, and I think he's very keen to have you along to do a section sometime.
Oh, that would be lovely. I'd love to.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for coming along, Ollie. It's been great to have you back. And we'll hear from you again very soon.
Oh, I hope so.
All right, and thanks people in the chat room for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of the show and the next segment coming up, whatever it is. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Good evening, everyone.
Bye.
And so that's the end of the show, guys. How was that show for you?
Oh, the whole thing was fantastic when that thing happened.
That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life, especially what Martimer did around 2 minutes into his segment.
Yeah, where he did the thing with the guy and the midgets and the donkey and all that. But like I say, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back again very soon. And just to let everyone know, if you are enjoying the show, you can help us out by pledging to the Patreon. There's some nice little rewards there. And Lundi, do you have anything you want to shout out? I think people are always asking what your next videos are going to be or if you've got any plans.
I have no clue. Real life always is a pain in the ass when you're trying to be also a YouTuber. So I don't know what I'm going to do another video about later on.
Yeah, just to let everyone, I do have a whole heap of scripts for both my other channels, The Skeptical Lizard and my Cal McDonald channel, which I got quite a good reception for the Cal McDonald one, but I've got a huge backlog of scripts I've got to get round to at some point. And Mr. Ziller, do you have anything you want to shout out or promote?
Obviously my channel. I should have another one I'm just going through the scripts on at the moment that's going through the Eratosthenes. Other than that, just to tell everybody that look out for The Principle. It's coming out soon to violate your eyeballs.
Oh yes, and we do plan to do a commentary on that movie when it comes out, and hopefully we can get Mr. Coolhard Logic to join us. I know everyone would love to hear that. I think that's it. Just let us know if you give us your feedback, as always, on the show. Contact at trollingwithlogic.com, and they say I see you all, and we really hope you enjoyed it. So that's bye from me, and if you guys want to say goodbye.
Later, everybody.
Catch you later.